Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network, your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage, news, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, NFL fans, welcome to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're talking NFC West team needs post first week of free agency and prior to the NFL draft. We're just taking a look at rosters and kind of doing evaluations for each division. And we're starting with the NFC West this week. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, this is an interesting division because last year they were easily the class division in the NFL. You had three teams make the playoffs, the fourth being a team that had been kind of a perennial playoff team for over a decade, and then that kind of fell apart finally. But three make the playoffs, two make the title game for the NFC title game. So was a great division. Now viewed as one of the weaker divisions all at once. A lot of stuff has happened, and just an interesting division that they need some of those draft picks to hit.
Yeah, I don't know if it measures out as one of the weakest divisions. I think it's definitely diminished. Obviously, it started with the trade of Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos in the AFC West, got him out of the NFC West. Davante Adams comes back into this division in for the Raiders, or not Davante Adams, but gets out of the NFC. So you'd think it would make this division competitive, but I think the loss of Russell Wilson's understated a little bit. Really sends the Seahawks back on their heels to where they say they're going to be competitive this year and they're going to win now mode, and Pete Carroll's going to come out rah rah rah. They're not going to be good. Their offense is really not great. Their defense is pretty decent, but it's not enough to carry a team without a Russell Wilson who's been carrying that team now for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And Drew Lock is now at the helm. That's not going to intimidate anybody. Chances are they won't stand still there, but that's the way it is right now. I've got Russell. I've got the quarterback position as a position of need for the Seahawks. Drew Lock is there, but the NFL draft is coming up. All eyes have been on Malik Willis lately. Had a great pro day. There's talk of Desmond Ridder rising up a little bit and Kenny Pickett maybe dropping back a little bit. What is your thoughts as we start talking about the roster? Just start right at the top with the quarterback position for the Seahawks.
Well, the Seahawks, if they're smart, they won't touch any of these quarterbacks in this draft because, Malik Willis has all the physical tools, but go watch his tape and you'll realize that the guy has not been playing in an offense that translates to the NFL. He's got a lot of learning to do before he's ready to play.
I think that's totally, absolutely true.
And the rest of this group is not good. They're just not. There's not a true franchise quarterback in this class. So the best thing that they could do is probably play Drew Lock and lose. The roster as it stands right now is like a 3 or 4 win roster, which puts them in position to draft a quarterback a year from now. And we know that next year's quarterback class is going to be pretty good. So it's good that you have quarterback on there as a team need, but I just don't understand how they're going to make that work and actually end up better and not end up with an Andy Dalton style, caliber quarterback. Is you can get to the playoffs, you might be able to win a game in the playoffs, but you are not a true contender
if you have a good roster.
Yeah.
And as we can talk about Seattle's roster. I mean, they got Chris Carson and Penny at running back. Chris Carson's got the neck thing. He was injured, went on injured reserve last year. He's still under contract. Doesn't necessarily mean he makes the team come training camp or out of training camp, especially if they look to the draft to add to that corner running back room. Wide receivers are looking okay. They've got Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Dwayne Eskridge there, Freddie Swain as their fourth guy. They may draft a guy later on, but
they should.
But
It's a good wide receiver draft, and you can get a guy that adds to your wide receiver room late in the draft, and they should do that. But then you start looking at the offensive line. Their offensive line is genuinely kind of awful. It's been awful for years, and right now they have no offensive tackles that look like NFL starters. They've got a pair of young guys that have the talent to develop into that, but both of their starters are gone. They're both they were both free agents. I guess they're both unsigned, so technically they could come back, but they're not currently on the roster, and the team has made no effort to go re-sign them. But they just don't have offensive tackles. They're okay at guard, and at center they've got a guy who didn't play last year. He played like 17 snaps or whatever it was over the whole year. I mean, that's Austin Blythe, previously of the Rams. So the Shane Waldron, Andy Dickerson, which is the offensive line coach for the Seahawks. There's the connection there. But again, he didn't play last year. So who knows? Yeah. So on offense, I mean, they have receiver talent, but they don't have anyone to get them the ball. They've got questions at running back because they have two guys that are never healthy. They don't have an offensive line that can pass block or run block, and they don't have a quarterback. So what are you going to do with? Okay, we didn't mention that they've got a pretty good tight end group, but you've got tight ends and receivers and nothing else.
Well, at least you came out at least you came out with something positive for them. So it's not looking good. So they've got legitimate needs all over the offense. It's a good draft. They've got some high picks. They've got four picks in the top 100 right now. We know John Schneider, he likes to move around, so they may end up with 5 picks total out of the top 100. A couple of those on the offensive side, I think, would help them a little bit. You're right. I don't know that they're necessarily going to look at quarterback. Maybe one drops to them at 40 or 41 that they would consider, maybe a Desmond Ridder, somebody like that. Otherwise, I think they stay pat and kind of move towards next year. Pete says they're going to win this year. They're likely going to finish below 5 wins probably with the roster that they currently have, even if they add to it in the draft. It's just going to be an uphill struggle for them. On the defensive side, Keith, I've got down edge rusher, linebacker, and cornerback. Is that about right?
That's about right. I would say, they're set at safety because they just re-signed Diggs, and they've got Adams. They're actually better at linebacker than I think, and edge rusher than I think most people will realize, because they're making that scheme change. And so a couple of guys that are listed as defensive ends are now going to be outside linebackers because they're going to be in a 3-4. So that kind of helps, but they need someone to line up next to Brooks where Bobby Wagner was last year. And, so they
that's a big hole. Bobby Wagner, man, all pro,
multi-year all pro, first ballot Hall of Famer. And so that's a huge hole in the middle. So they need linebacker, but they don't need, between edge rusher and linebacker, that's kind of the same thing in this defense, because they're going to be switching to that 3-4. So honestly, their defense, despite seeing some names leave, the defense actually has some decent talent. It's not a great defense by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not a terrible defense. It might statistically end up terrible because the offense can't stay on the field and keep them off the field. But overall, there is some defensive talent on this roster. But this looks like it's a team that's headed to the ability to draft a franchise quarterback a year from now.
Okay, so interesting. Yeah, their cornerback room is kind of questionable to me. Inside the loop on the Seahawks folks, they're kind of they like their corners, but it's not going to intimidate any opposing offense, I don't think. With Trey Brown there, Artie Burns is a kind of a retread project. Sidney Jones getting his second life with the Seahawks. And then Justin Coleman, their slot guy, just re-signed as well. He's probably their best piece, that's proven anyway over a long period of time. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Yep. All right. I've got to figure out, Keith, on my end. There we go. How to change this. So let's move on to the Arizona Cardinals and see what they want to do. So this offseason, they haven't done a ton.
They haven't done much of anything.
They haven't done much of anything. They have Rodney Hudson at center, Sean Harlow, Justin Pugh at guard, cornerback. They've got Byron Murphy, Marco Wilson, edge. J.J. Watt is the piece with Zach Allen. Marcus Golden is there. That's actually a pretty decent group, even though I've got it listed. And then A.J. Green's unsigned. He's at the end of his road. They've got Hopkins and Rondell Moore, Rashard Lawrence from LSU, who they drafted pretty high, is their defensive tackle. 3-tech. They're looking pretty good. They lost Chandler Jones. They lost Chase Edmonds, the running back. Jordan Hicks, the linebacker. Christian Kirk got an absurd contract at the wide receiver position. They were able to re-sign James Conner, Zach Ertz at tight end, and then a couple other pieces. But really, I thought for a team that was somewhat close last year, kind of fell apart down the stretch. Funny enough, as you predicted, didn't really go out and try to do much with free agency. And then we'll see what they do in the draft. But I've got their team needs on the board there. What do you think?
Well, they seem to have taken a step back overall. Center and guard are both problems. That's right in the center, the interior offensive line, and they've got an unhappy quarterback. They also need to give weapons to that unhappy quarterback, so they can't block for him. They don't have people for him to throw to. I mean, Nuke Hopkins is still great, and they've got talent at wide receiver, but they did lose Christian Kirk, which was their take the top off the defense guy, and AJ Green, who, yes, he's at the end of his career, but he was steady and really helped when Hopkins got injured. Both those guys are not going to be there. This is a team that needs wide receiver help. They need offensive line help. They got to figure out how to get their quarterback happy. There's a lot that needs to happen, and they didn't really do much in free agency to fill any of those needs or any of the problems that they've been having on defense either. So, and the fact that they lost their best pass rusher, one of the league's best pass rusher, not just theirs, but just an absolutely elite player. And they've done nothing to replace him either.
Right.
So,
well, they still have J.J. Watt, who was injured most of the year last year, and Zach Allen, Marcus Golden are still
last year players. And the year before, and the year before. J.J. Watt's great when he's on the field, but look at the last 4 seasons. He hasn't been on the field very much. And that ends up being a concern if they are expecting him to be the guy. Going forward. So, and they've always needed cornerback help. That's been a situation for that.
Yeah.
Team for
and those guys are middling guys. I mean, they really are. So yeah, interesting. So draft pick wise, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Okay.
So we've talked about 2 teams that have both taken significant steps back
in the NFC West, which was really competitive last year. And, it really confuses me because they've got their franchise quarterback. They've got some pieces. You would have thought Arizona, this would have been the year they'd just go all in.
They were what, 10-2 at one point in the number 1 overall seed, spot in
Kyler
the
Murray
NFC.
was the MVP guy.
And then as every team that their coach has ever coached has done, they faded down the stretch and looked awful doing it. And so then you end up with a situation where, they made the playoffs, but they weren't competitive there. They made one game out of the last 6 games. Just overall was not a great situation for them. And then they've taken a big step backwards, and they haven't improved to try and get past that and get over that hump. So it's interesting. We'll see how far back they go. They have their franchise quarterback, and that's the hardest piece. And Seattle's going to learn that. this year, but you got to put some stuff
that's
around
true,
him.
right? Yeah, interesting.
And then speaking of franchise quarterbacks, San Francisco is the next team there. Made it to the NFC title game kind of unexpectedly.
They kind of backed in. Honestly, they did.
I mean, they were that team that never really looked good at any point of the season. They were winning games that they could win. They lost some games that were head scratchers, and then they lost a couple that you expect them to win. They're like, okay, they're going to make it as a wild card, be one and done, and they ended up winning a couple playoff games. And you're like, yeah, but are they good? Are they actually good? But there they are in the NFC title game, so maybe they are. Overall, though, the biggest question that they're going to have to deal with isn't on your list, and that's what they do at quarterback, because they've got the guy that led them all last year and got them to that game, Jimmy Garoppolo, who is a limited player. He's not a guy that's going to go win you games. He's a game manager type. And then they went and spent 3 first-round draft picks on the elite upside guy in Trey Lance, but then they didn't get him any playing time during his rookie season. So they still have to deal with his growing pains if they move in that direction. And if they stick with Jimmy Garoppolo, then why did you waste 3 first-round draft picks on Trey Lance?
Yeah, I'm confounded by that.
That's the whole situation there is weird. I think they make
I don't even know.
Move.
Yeah, I don't even know why San Francisco has waited so long to move Garoppolo. They missed a window of opportunity where the trade market was just on fire. Everyone was like trying to figure out their quarterback situations. Now it's too late. Everyone's kind of settled in on what they're going to do. There's Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe without a playing position in 2022. Who knows? They don't dare set Trey Lance again, do they?
No, they can't. Not for a guy that, I mean, it's not like when Aaron Rodgers had to sit because you had Brett Favre, right? You're sitting Trey Lance for Jimmy Garoppolo. That's just weird.
That's weird.
It's just the whole situation is odd there. And the thing is, I want to say they've got one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL. So this whole situation is just odd, especially given they've got a coaching staff that I really trust. So, it's just strange. Overall, though, it's a pretty good roster. They've got some things that they need. They need defensive line help. They've lost a bunch of key pieces the last couple of off seasons.
Yeah, they've got Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead there,
who are great.
But after that, it's really thin. They brought back Maurice Hurst, who's been kind of a wash so far as a draft pick, and there's just not a lot of things to build around after that. Nick Bosa was injured the 1 year. Eric Armstead's a great piece on the inside, but I'm telling you, they're probably going to end up trying to draft somebody, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, this in the past, when that defense was scary, that was their strength. But over the last couple of years, they've had to let some guys walk because you can't pay everyone in a salary cap league. And, they've missed on a couple of draft picks. And now what was once a major strength still has a couple of elite players, but there's no depth. There's no they need a third starter. They need a nose tackle in there, and it's just weird to see that defensive line be the top 2 things that defense needs.
Yeah.
And I think you're missing cornerback on your list.
Yeah, you're right. Cornerback could have been on there for sure. They did get Shavarius Ward from the Chiefs. That's their biggest offseason signing in free agency. But after that, it's pretty thin. They still are missing Jason Verrett, who was there last year. He's still unsigned out there in free agency, and a number of other guys as well. Dante Johnson, is a guy that they really like and is out there in free agency. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with their cornerback room, Keith, but it's probably something that they will address. I just figured that they would address those, bring those guys back, and they just haven't yet shown up.
Yeah. Running back's another one for them. The last couple of years, they kind of wanted Raheem Mostert to be the guy, and he just hasn't been able to be healthy, and now he's gone. And for a team that wants to run the ball, they want to have get that outside zone running game going, play action, lots of bootlegs, everything. You've got to have a running back. And they've piecemealed it together with random
Elijah
guys.
Mitchell and Trey Sermon.
Yeah, and guys that, I mean, they're okay. They're not special. And I just, that offense would be more efficient if it had a guy in the backfield that teams had to focus on.
I agree. Yeah.
It would certainly make Trey Lance's job easier, because if they're focusing on the running back and he pulls the ball down and rolls out, he's going to have more time. He's going to have more space. He might be able to use all that athleticism to get up the field. To me, that's an understated need for them, is running back.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, they do have Samuel, who's moved to running back last year at wide receiver.
Yes.
So maybe maybe I'm overstating that, because if they leave him
not really. That's susceptible. That makes him susceptible to injury, and he already is.
If they leave him at running back, then they need multiple wide receivers, which you also have on your list. I would really like to see Samuel used as a weapon. Put him in the backfield occasionally, line him up in the slot, get him outside, move him all over the field, because teams will struggle to line up guys against him because he's so dynamic. He can do so many things well. Pigeonholing him into a single role removes some of his effectiveness. He's just too good. So I wanted to see them get a full-time running back, and then they can move Samuel around all over the place.
Yeah, and at wide receiver, they're down Travis Benjamin. Mohamed Sanu is gone now. Both those guys didn't perform up to where they wanted them to perform anyway. I think that's definitely a position of need for them. And then tight end with Kittle there, he's really the only guy. It'd be nice to take some pressure off him, or have some help with an inside inline blocker type that could help out the tackles there on a kind of a poor offensive line overall.
I mean, going back to the wide receivers, the fact that they've got Ayuk and Samuels, I mean, that is a quality pairing. I mean, straight up. They need people beyond them? Yes, because especially if you're going to use Samuel in the backfield sometimes and move him around, they need another guy. I mean, luckily for them, this is a great draft to need a wide receiver, because there are a bunch of really good ones.
Okay. So
that moves us to the Rams, Super Bowl, the Super Bowl champion team. As we work our way up the division standings here, the Rams are interesting. They're really interesting because they're coming off a Super Bowl win. They went all in on last year, and it worked.
That's right. I mean, they traded for Stafford, and he came in, and we knew that the team had the opportunity as soon as it moved on from Jared Goff, because the team was being held back. The offensive playbook was only being used about half of its ability. And sure enough, Stafford just came in and went to work, did his business, and they had a mid-season acquisition of Beckham, and that really helped, even with Woods not being in there.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things is people are like, oh, he had too many interceptions and blah, blah, blah. Well, a lot of that happened when Woods got hurt. They had this like mid-season like slide where they went from looking like a Super Bowl team to looking like maybe they're not as good. And then they came back and it started looking like a Super Bowl team once they got Beckham integrated into the offense, so he could do for the offense what Woods had been doing. And I mean, they won the Super Bowl. Like, what can you say about their method? When it worked exactly the way they wanted it to.
Yeah. And it seemed like it was a diminished situation, though. Green Bay kind of fell apart a little bit at the end there, and the Seahawks were going to be in competition with them. They fell by the wayside. The Arizona Cardinals completely fell apart down the stretch. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just weren't that good at the end. And the Rams just by default, I think, kind of ended up into that spot. Now, fans are going to kill me for saying that, but it's true. And then they faced the diminished kind of marginal team in the NFC Championship game with the 49ers, and they were kind of the default team.
Yeah, I think that's not giving them enough credit. Matthew Stafford was a great acquisition. They went out and got Von Miller to provide some pass rush balance, so it wasn't just
they made some good moves. I mean, the Beckham Jr. and the Miller signings, I will have to say, made that team over the top.
It really did, and they were balanced. They were good. They weathered that storm in the middle of the season. Came out, and I think that you're underselling a little bit. I mean, this is a team that does have the best defensive player in the game, right in the middle of that defensive line, and
yeah, right.
That's going to win you games. I mean, he's just so good. We're talking about Aaron Donald, for those of you who couldn't figure that part out. But ultimately, though, all of that, what we're talking about, it worked. They won a Super Bowl. They got their championship. What is happening now is, well, they don't have any of those draft picks. The first round pick, it was gone for the Stafford trade. Their second round pick was gone to the Von Miller trade. I think their third round pick was gone to the Von Miller trade. There's a lot of draft picks that aren't there. They have to wait a long time.
Yeah, I think they picked their first pick is in the hundreds, low hundreds. Yeah.
And then on top of that, Von Miller left, signed a massive deal with Buffalo.
Yes.
They Odell Beckham Jr. not coming back. These guys that
they did get Allen Robinson.
They did get Allen Robinson, which was a really good get.
I think that's actually an upgrade. Actually, yeah,
but overall, you know what I'm saying. Like they rolled the dice on these guys that were rentals, paid the price for it, and now they are looking at, how do they extend this window? They have all those guys left. They don't have a lot of cap room. They don't have any draft capital. How do they extend this window and try and go win another one? They're in a really interesting and kind of tenuous spot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Robert Woods left. He was replaced. Then they got Allen Robinson this offseason. Darius Williams, their corner, left to the Jaguars for, some absurd amount because that's the Jaguars. Yep. Austin Corbett to the Panthers for the same sort of situation. They re-signed their left tackle. It looks like Whitworth is definitely retired. So no, Boom's coming back. He looks like the inherent starter there. I did put offensive tackle there as a team need because of that. I think they like Boom, but they might look to the draft to address at least depth there. It's tough when you only have a limited amount of draft capital, so we'll see what happens. Brian Allen came back at center. I thought that was fortunate for them. Matt Gay's back at kicker. Coleman Shelton came back as a kind of a backup center option for them. Other than that, it's pretty empty at corner. I mean, they got Jalen Ramsey. And then it's pretty light after that. I mean, Robert Rochelle was injured on injured reserve last year. He's kind of projected to be the number 2 corner there. At linebacker, they have Taven Howard and Justin Hollins. Troy Reader's yet to unsign. Andrew Whitworth, I mentioned, is retired. They have Leonard Floyd on the edge, but he doesn't really have anybody paired up with him.
Yeah, he is a good pass rusher, and I don't want to say this, but he also would benefit greatly from having Von Miller on the other side.
Yeah,
and that gave them really, 3 guys that could get after the quarterback, one on each side and one in the middle. And now they're back to what they were before the trade, which is one on the outside and one in the middle. They need another edge rusher.
So, and then at tight end, they've got Tyler Higbee, but no real options, to pair with him. So. Do the losses then outweigh the gains this season so far for the Rams? And do you think it affects their ability to compete for the division and or the NFC?
Well, I think the losses do outweigh the gains. I mean, there's a lot of things that have left that have not been replaced, including Von Miller, their starting left tackle. We already went through it all. Those were big contributors to the Super Bowl team. At the same time, we've already gone through the other NFC West teams. who is going to step up and compete with them?
Right.
The 49ers, maybe.
If Trey Lance works out.
If Trey Lance works out. If Trey Lance has some serious growing pains this year, Arizona, but they already stumbled and struggled and couldn't finish the deal last year despite that great start. And, they've taken a step back. So I still think they're the class of the division. Are they the class of the NFC again? I don't know. Tampa's coming back. They've been able to.
I don't know that they were necessarily the class of the NFC last year. Like I said, I think that they backed into it. I think they were like the second or third team last year. I mean, Green Bay was going to be the team up until till they lost. So I mean, it just worked out that way. This year, Tampa's going to try to come back. Green Bay is going to be in it, but they just gave away Devontae Adams.
Yeah, I mean, the
NFC has gone kind of. It's been very interesting.
The entire NFC as a whole is diminished. This division, which went from being really solid and very difficult to win, it seems like every team has taken a step back. I still think that they're the team to beat in this division. And honestly, I mean, Green Bay, Devontae Adams is gone. Smith is gone on the defense. Those are two incredibly important parts of that team that got them, to where they were last year, which wasn't the Super Bowl. Tampa, they have to be considered the team right now, right? I mean, they were won it the year before. They were close last year, but they had all of the weirdness and every wide receiver on that roster go down kind of all at once at the end of the year. And
NFL.com and still has them ranked as number 2 overall. Tampa Bay is number 4. San Francisco, they have actually as number 5. I think that's too high initially for San Francisco. Maybe they might be able to rise up that high. Number 6 is the Packers. I'm just doing NFC. Yep. And then you got to go all the way to number 12 after that, Dallas Cowboys. And then it doesn't get any better. I mean, you've got to go then all the way down to number 18, Cardinals. So what did I mention? Like 4 or 5 teams in the top 18. Everything else is in the AFC now.
So since we're doing the NFC West, where's Seattle on there? My guess is like 29.
I would think like 23 or 24. Let's see. They're 24 currently. Previous rank 20. They ended the season 21st.
Which I think was too low.
So they're behind the Panthers. They're behind the Panthers, and following them is the Chicago Bears and the Washington Commanders and the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah, interesting. That doesn't account for much there, but I just thought I'd share that just as a kind of a where the pundits have them ordered now.
The NFC just as a whole, it's very interesting because you have Matt Ryan left the NFC, and you had just Russell all this Wilson, talent.
Obviously,
Russell Wilson, Von Miller, all these talent, all these names left the NFC and moved.
Devontae Adams
moved to AFC teams. The AFC is going to be brutal, and the NFC is going to be like, who's left standing that can still play football? And oddly, right now it feels like Tampa is the team to beat, with an 80-year-old Tom Brady at the helm. So
there you have it.
I don't know. I'm going to make 80-year-old Tom Brady jokes until he stays retired, but that doesn't mean he can't play. That's why I have him.
He probably looked at the same thing we were looking at, and he was going, I've got a legit shot at coming back and making the Super Bowl again. So
it's like, we could go win it, because who's going to compete? It's really Green Bay and the Rams ish.
Do you think Green Bay is going to be okay with Devontae Adams there? It's really hard to tell because their offense has been so structured, but Hackett's moved on. Now what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers there? Is he going to have weapons? Is he going to like where he's at? Is he going to complain? That's a whole thing there.
He signed that massive deal, and then
Adams left.
And then they traded Adams, and it's like he was already complaining about the fact that all of his receivers were leaving. So what are you going to do now? They clearly have to go do something. Go sign, make a big.
That's where we talked about, and you're seeing the rumors out there, not just rumors, but legit writers talking about the DK Metcalf situation in Seattle, because Seattle's timeline, if they're going to rebuild, they've got Drew Lock there. They're going to take a look at him. It sounds like maybe some kid in the draft that would be kind of backup initially. Where does DK Metcalf fall into this? You've seen Devontae Adams get the mega deal. Now you've seen Tyreek Hill get the mega deal. He's eligible now for an extension. Do the Seattle Seahawks want to pay DK Metcalf going into the future with uncertainty at the quarterback position, or do they take advantage on the team building mode that they're currently in and get what they can get for DK Metcalf?
Yeah, it depends on what the Packers offer, because if the Packers come in and offer, you're not going to get the Tyreek Hill trade where they got 5.
Why not? Guy's young, guy's big, difference maker, tilts the field. Why not? Why not get it two firsts out of this deal, or a first, a second, and maybe a second the next year?
Because I just go look at production, and Tyreek Hill is a guy that has been more productive over the last 3 years.
True, but look at the offenses that DK Metcalf has come out of. Now, granted, Wilson's his quarterback, but nonetheless, it's a pretty restrictive offense that they've been in.
It is, but I do think that's there. And then I don't know. Tyreek Hill is a guy that I've heard interviews with NFL cornerbacks, and they said that the hardest guy to cover in the NFL is Tyreek Hill, because because he's the fastest guy in the NFL, and it doesn't matter what you do as a defensive player, he can run away from you, and you can't catch him. And on top of that, can be
said with DK Metcalf against most guys. It's just interesting, but he's got the size and he's prototypical. I mean, he's got so much upside, Keith.
The thing with Hill is that he has that speed. He's faster than Metcalf, which is scary because Metcalf's really fast, but he's got that short area quickness too. He gets in and out of breaks as fast as anyone in the NFL. Metcalf doesn't do that. He's 6'4" and 220 pounds.
The yards after catch too is just a total difference maker.
So I
still think it would be a shocker. I think that you would be shocked. Of what teams may be willing to give up to get a DK Metcalf on their roster, just by the virtue of the crazy trade market offseason that we have seen so far.
Crazy. But if Seattle could get 3 or 4 draft picks, including first and a second for
and
DK
take it off the books in the future,
I'd have a hard time seeing them saying no. And they don't have a quarterback that can get him the ball. It's like
that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing. It's like he's going to squall. He's going to languish this year. He's going to be complaining. He's already has some maturity issues we've seen come out. And it's going to be pretty ugly. And if they can turn that around and get something positive out of it this year, again, in a roster that we just talked about at the top of this show that needs help all over the place, everywhere. Not just one position. They're not just one position away. DK Metcalf's not going to help him or hurt him this year, I don't think.
DK Metcalf is really the Ferrari in the garage that you can't afford to put gas in, right? Great. But what good does it do you?
That'd be very interesting. I mean, this next couple of weeks or right before the draft, I could see a draft day trade on something like this, where it's like, what else could you ask for in the 2022 offseason but a draft day trade of DK Metcalf for first round, multiple picks? It'd be the icing, really.
Yeah, this has been a really fun offseason.
True. I mean, completely remade the landscape of the NFL. I mean, that's not an understatement. All right. I think we're out of here. Thanks, Keith. We're coming back here. The next 7 shows, we're doing all the divisions, all the divisions, every team, every need. And so we're talking about a ton of players. And so hopefully you guys will join us. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. The show's at PF_Playbook. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. Please subscribe, share with your friends and family. Until next time, take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.